The sun beat down on Elaine Johnson's face as she carried the last box from her car to the front porch of her new home. A bead of sweat trickled down her temple, but she couldn't help smiling. After 15 years of grinding away at her law firm, she had finally done it. Purchased her dream property in Lakeside Estates, one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in the county. The 2-story lakefront house with its weathered blue shutters and wraparound deck wasn't just any home. It represented everything she had worked for since graduating from law school, with massive student debt and big dreams. Back then, her classmates had laughed when she shared her 10-year plan to own property in this neighborhood. Well, it had taken her 15 years instead of 10. But here she was. Elaine set the box down and took a moment to admire the view. Through the trees, she could see sunlight dancing on the lake's surface. The private beach access was what had initially caught her attention when the listing went up. But it wasn't what had sealed the deal. No. What had truly convinced her to empty her savings and investments was the surprising package deal the previous owner had offered. Mr. Henderson had been in his 80s, the last original resident from when the neighborhood was built in the 1970s. Over the years, he had gradually purchased adjacent lots and community facilities as other original owners moved away or passed on. When he decided to move to Arizona to live with his daughter, he wanted to sell everything as a package. Not just the house, but the additional properties, including the community pool, tennis courts, and several undeveloped acres with lake access. The Homeowners Association had been nervous about an outsider purchasing so much of their community space. They had tried to pool resources to buy the recreational areas themselves, but they couldn't match Elaine's offer. In the end, they had reluctantly agreed to the sale with the understanding that residents would still have access under terms to be negotiated with the new owner. Elaine hadn't planned on becoming a property magnate, but the opportunity was too good to pass up. As a corporate attorney specializing in real estate law, she understood the long-term value of what she was buying. Approximately 40% of the neighborhood's common areas now belonged to her. She picked up the box again and pushed open the front door with her hip. Inside, the house was a maze of half-unpacked boxes and misplaced furniture. The moving company had left everything in disarray, claiming they couldn't stay longer because of another appointment. Elaine had been too tired to argue, deciding to organize everything herself over the next few days. After placing the final box in what would eventually become her home office, Elaine collapsed onto the couch and checked her watch. It was just past 3 in the afternoon, and the temperature outside had climbed to nearly 90 degrees. The house was still stuffy despite the air conditioning running at full blast. A swim would be perfect right now, she murmured to herself, running her fingers through her short, curly hair. She had yet to explore the beach access, which would require clearing a path through the somewhat overgrown trail behind the house. The community pool, however, was just a 5-minute walk away and, according to the paperwork she had signed yesterday, was now officially her property. With newfound energy, Elaine dug through several boxes until she found her swimsuit, a modest navy blue one-piece she used for lap swimming at her old apartment complex. She changed quickly, threw a light cover-up over the swimsuit, slipped her feet into sandals and grabbed a towel and her phone. As she locked her front door, she noticed a couple across the street watching her from their garage. Elaine raised her hand in a friendly wave. The man nodded stiffly before turning away, but the woman continued staring. Elaine kept smiling despite the cool reception. She had expected some adjustment period. New faces always took time to be accepted in established communities. The walk to the pool was pleasant despite the heat. Lakeside Estates had been designed with nature in mind, with mature oak trees lining the streets and providing welcome shade. The houses were set far apart, each on at least half an acre, giving residents privacy while maintaining a sense of community through shared spaces. When Elaine reached the pool area, she found it surrounded by a tall wrought iron fence with a gate that required a key card for entry. She frowned, realizing she hadn't received a key card yet. According to the property transfer documents, the previous owner should have left the master access cards and maintenance keys with her real estate agent. Great, she muttered. Another thing they forgot. She examined the gate more closely and noticed a small sign with a phone number for maintenance issues. Using her phone, she called the number and was surprised when someone answered on the second ring. Lakeside Maintenance, this is Tom. Hi, Tom, this is Elaine Johnson. I just moved in today and I seem to be missing the pool access card. There was a pause on the line. Ms. Johnson? The new owner of the Henderson property? That's right. Oh, I'm so sorry, ma'am. Mr. Henderson mentioned you'd be moving in soon, but we weren't expecting you until next week. I can bring you a temporary card right now if you'd like. I'm just down the street at the maintenance shed. That would be wonderful, thank you. While waiting, Elaine peered through the fence at the pristine pool. It was larger than she had expected, with a separate lap lane section and a more shallow area for casual swimmers. Lounge chairs were arranged neatly around the deck, and potted plants added touches of color. The entire area was deserted, surprising for such a hot Saturday afternoon. Within minutes, an older man with weathered skin and a friendly smile appeared on a golf cart. He introduced himself as Tom, the maintenance supervisor who had been taking care of the neighborhood facilities for over 20 years. Mr. Henderson spoke very highly of you, Tom said as he handed her a temporary access card. Said you were planning to keep everything running for the community just like he did. Elaine smiled. That's the plan, though I might make some improvements over time. Tom nodded approvingly. That'd be nice. Place could use some updating. The pool heater's been temperamental for years. He hesitated, then added, just so you know, most folks come later in the day after the worst of the heat. That's probably why it's empty now. Elaine thanked him for the information and the card. After Tom drove away, she swiped the card at the gate, which clicked open smoothly. The pool area was even more impressive up close. The water sparkled clear blue in the sunlight, and the landscaping around the perimeter created a private oasis feel. She placed her towel and phone on one of the lounge chairs, removed her cover-up, and dipped a cautious toe in the water. It was refreshingly cool without being cold. Perfect. With a contented sigh, she slid into the water and pushed off from the wall, swimming a lazy backstroke across the pool. The water embraced her tired muscles, washing away the stress of the move and the months of paperwork that had preceded it. For the first time since starting this journey, Elaine felt complete peace. This place was hers now. Not just the pool, but a significant portion of the neighborhood. She had worked hard for this moment, sacrificing weekends and relationships to climb the corporate ladder at her law firm. Her parents had always emphasized the importance of ownership. Both had grown up in rentals, moving frequently as prices increased or buildings changed hands. Own something, Elaine, her father would say. When you own it, they can't take it away so easily. She had taken those words to heart, starting small with her first condo 10 years ago, then upgrading as her career advanced. This purchase was the culmination of that journey, not just ownership but control over her environment in a way few people ever achieved. As she floated on her back, eyes closed against the bright sun, Elaine made mental notes about potential improvements. The pool itself was in excellent condition, but the deck showed signs of wear. The lounge chairs were functional but dated. Perhaps a small refreshment area would be nice, or even a hot tub for the cooler months. She had some capital left from the sale of her previous home that could be invested in upgrades. Lost in her thoughts, Elaine didn't immediately notice the sound of the gate opening. It wasn't until a sharp voice cut through her reverie that she realized she was no longer alone. Excuse me, what do you think you're doing here? Startled, Elaine stood up in the water and turned toward the voice. A woman in her 50s with highlighted blonde hair cut in an angled bob stood by the gate, hands on her hips. She wore white capri pants and a pastel pink polo shirt with the Neighborhood Association logo embroidered on the chest. Her expression was a mixture of surprise and disapproval. Elaine smiled politely. Just having a swim. It's a beautiful day for it. The woman's eyes narrowed as she stepped closer to the pool edge. This is a private facility. Residents only. I don't recognize you, and you certainly don't have a resident sticker on your towel. Elaine hadn't known about any sticker requirement. She began to wade toward the pool steps. I just moved in today, actually. I'm Elaine Johnson, the new owner of... I don't care what story you've cooked up. The woman interrupted, her voice rising. I know everyone in this neighborhood, and we haven't had any new black families move in recently. I'm on the welcoming committee, and I would know. The woman's emphasis on black made Elaine pause halfway up the steps. So that was what this was about. She had encountered similar situations before, people assuming she didn't belong based solely on her appearance. Usually it was more subtle, but this woman wasn't bothering with pretense. Keeping her voice calm and professional, the same tone she used in difficult negotiations, Elaine replied, I understand there might be some confusion. I completed the purchase yesterday. Perhaps the residence list hasn't been updated yet. The woman pulled out her phone. I'm calling security. We've had problems with outsiders sneaking in before. You'll need to leave immediately. Elaine stepped out of the pool, water streaming from her swimsuit onto the concrete deck. She reached for her towel and wrapped it around her waist, maintaining her composure despite the growing tension. Years of being the only black woman in boardrooms full of white executives had taught her to never show anger, no matter how justified. That won't be necessary, Elaine said. I can show you my identification and property documents if that would help clear things up. But the woman had already dialed and was speaking into her phone. Yes, there's an unauthorized person at the community pool. No resident ID, no sticker, refuses to leave. Yes, I'll stay until you arrive. Elaine sighed quietly. This wasn't how she had imagined her first day in her new home would go. She reached for her phone, prepared to pull up the electronic copies of her closing documents. As she did, she noticed 2 more residents entering the pool area, their curious gazes moving between her and the woman with the phone. Little did this neighbor know that she wasn't just confronting any new resident, but the woman who now owned the very ground they were standing on. Elaine took a deep breath. This was going to be an interesting welcome to the neighborhood indeed. The woman with the blonde bob introduced herself with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm Diane Reynolds, head of the Neighborhood Watch and vice president of the Homeowners Association. And you are? She dragged out the last word, her tone making it clear she didn't believe Elaine belonged there regardless of her answer. Elaine Johnson, she replied calmly, extending her hand. I just closed on my property yesterday. Diane ignored the outstretched hand, instead looking Elaine up and down with undisguised skepticism. Which property exactly? Because I know for a fact there haven't been any sales in the last month. My husband is the real estate liaison for the board. By now, the 2 other residents who had entered the pool area were watching with open curiosity. One, an older gentleman walking with a slight limp, frowned at the confrontation. The other, a middle-aged woman in a floral swimsuit, hovered uncertainly by the gate. I purchased the Henderson property, Elaine explained, keeping her voice level. The lakefront house on Oak Lane. Diane's eyebrows shot up. The Henderson estate? That's been on the market for over a year at an absurd price point. Nobody could afford that package deal. Well, I did, Elaine said simply. She reached for her phone. I have the closing documents right here if you'd like to see them. Oh, I'm sure you do, Diane said with a dismissive wave of her hand. But security will verify everything when they arrive, which should be any minute now. The older gentleman took a few steps closer. Diane, maybe we should— Not now, Frank, Diane snapped without looking at him. Her attention remained fixed on Elaine. You see, we have procedures here, rules. This is a private community and we take security very seriously. If you really did buy property here, then you should have received a proper orientation and temporary ID from your real estate agent. Elaine nodded. You're right. There seem to have been some oversights in the closing process. I didn't receive a resident ID or the pool sticker you mentioned. Convenient, Diane muttered. The tension was broken by the sound of tires on gravel. Through the fence, Elaine could see a white SUV with Lakeside Estate security, emblazoned on the side, pulling into the parking lot. A tall man in a khaki uniform stepped out and adjusted his belt before making his way to the pool gate. That was fast, Roy, Diane called out, her voice suddenly cheerful. We have an unexpected visitor who claims to be a new resident. The security guard, Roy, nodded at Diane before turning his attention to Elaine. His expression was professional but cautious. Good afternoon, ma'am. May I see some identification, please? Of course. Elaine retrieved her driver's license from her phone case and handed it to him. I'm Elaine Johnson. I purchased the Henderson property yesterday. I haven't received my resident credentials yet. Roy examined the license carefully, then returned it with a nod. Do you have any documentation of your purchase? The Henderson property has been a big topic of conversation around here. Before Elaine could respond, Diane interjected. She claims to have it on her phone, but anyone could mock up some documents. We need official verification. Roy gave Diane a look that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd dealt with her overzealousness. Let's see what Ms. Johnson has and we can go from there. Elaine opened her email app and found the message from her attorney containing the digital copies of the closing documents. She handed her phone to Roy. These were finalized yesterday afternoon. As you can see, the deed transfer includes not only the house but also the additional properties that were part of Mr. Henderson's estate. Roy scrolled through the documents, his eyebrows rising slightly as he read. After a moment, he looked up at Elaine with a new expression, something between surprise and respect. "These appear to be in order, Ms. Johnson. According to this, you now own the Henderson house, the adjacent lots and," he paused, glancing at Diane, "the community recreational facilities, including this pool." Diane snatched the phone from Roy's hands. "That's impossible. The HOA would never allow the pool to be sold to an individual. It's community property." "Actually," Roy said carefully, "the pool and tennis courts were privately owned by Mr. Henderson. He allowed community access as a courtesy. That's why we've had to negotiate usage terms with each new budget cycle." Diane's face flushed red as she stared at the documents on Elaine's phone. The other woman in the floral swimsuit had moved closer and was now standing beside Frank, both watching the scene unfold with increasing interest. "This can't be right," Diane insisted, thrusting the phone back at Elaine. "The board would have told me if someone had purchased the recreational facilities." "I'm the vice president." Frank cleared his throat. "Actually, Diane, there was an email about this last week, remember? President Wilson mentioned that a buyer had made an offer on the entire Henderson package. It was discussed in the emergency session on Tuesday." Diane whirled on him. "That was a preliminary discussion. Nothing was finalized." "Apparently it was," Frank replied, nodding toward Elaine's phone. Roy shifted uncomfortably, clearly eager to extricate himself from the neighborhood politics. "Well, everything seems to be in order with Ms. Johnson's documentation. I'll make a note in our system and fast-track her resident ID." He turned to Elaine. "Welcome to Lakeside Estates, Ms. Johnson. Sorry about the confusion." "Thank you, Roy," Elaine said with a genuine smile. "I understand the need for security procedures." Roy nodded and turned to leave, but Diane wasn't finished. "Wait just a minute," she demanded, her voice rising. "We need verification from the board. Call Wilson right now and confirm this." Roy sighed. "Diane, I don't need to call anyone. The documents are legally binding and properly filed with the county. Ms. Johnson is the new owner, and as such, she has every right to use the facilities she now owns." The emphasis on the word owns wasn't lost on anyone present. Diane's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Frank took the opportunity to step forward and introduce himself to Elaine. "Frank Patel," he said, extending his hand. "Welcome to the neighborhood." "Don't mind Diane, she's just very protective of our community." Elaine shook his hand. "Thank you, Frank, I understand. Change can be difficult." The woman in the floral swimsuit approached next. "I'm Olivia Chen. My husband and I live on Maple Drive. It's lovely to have a new neighbor, especially one who's invested so much in our community." As the introductions continued, Diane stood rigidly to the side, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. When Roy finally left, assuring Elaine that her permanent ID would be ready by tomorrow, Diane found her voice again. "Well," she said stiffly, "if you truly are the new owner, then we need to discuss the terms of community access to the pool. The association has certain expectations regarding hours and maintenance." Elaine nodded. "I'd be happy to discuss that at the appropriate time. For now, I was hoping to enjoy a swim after a long day of moving." "You can't just change the rules," Diane insisted, her voice taking on a slight tremor. "People here have routines, expectations." "I don't intend to disrupt anyone's routine," Elaine assured her. "Mr. Henderson and I discussed his arrangement with the community at length before I made my offer. I plan to honor the spirit of that agreement." Frank and Olivia exchanged glances. "What exactly did you and Mr. Henderson discuss?" Frank asked cautiously. Elaine smiled. "He wanted these spaces to remain accessible to the residents. That was important to him, and it's important to me, too. But he also felt that some updates were overdue, and I agree. I'm thinking about modernizing the facilities while keeping them community-focused." "That sounds wonderful," Olivia said, her face brightening. "The pool heater hasn't worked properly in years, and the tennis courts need resurfacing." "Exactly the kinds of improvements I had in mind," Elaine replied. Throughout this exchange, Diane's expression had grown increasingly sour. "This is all very presumptuous," she said sharply. "The board will need to approve any changes. We have procedures, bylaws." Elaine turned to her with a patient smile. "Of course. I'm not looking to circumvent the HOA's authority over the neighborhood as a whole, but it's important to clarify that while I want to work collaboratively with the board, these specific properties, the pool, tennis courts, and undeveloped lakefront lots, are now privately owned. They're not common areas subject to HOA governance in the same way as before. Diane's face paled. That's not possible. The HOA has always had final say over the recreational facilities. No, Frank corrected gently. The HOA had an agreement with Mr. Henderson. He maintained final authority but chose to involve the board in decisions as a courtesy. It's all in the bylaws, Diane. Elaine could see the realization washing over Diane's face. The understanding that power had shifted in a way she hadn't anticipated and couldn't control. The woman who Diane had tried to have removed from the pool area now owned not just a house in her precious neighborhood, but the very amenities that gave the community its exclusivity and value. I should finish my swim, Elaine said, breaking the awkward silence that had fallen. It's been a long day and I still have quite a bit of unpacking to do. Of course, Olivia said. Don't let us keep you. And welcome again to Lakeside. Diane remained frozen in place as Elaine removed her towel and slipped back into the pool. The cool water was even more refreshing now, washing away the tension of the confrontation. As she swam, she could hear Frank and Olivia speaking quietly to Diane, though she couldn't make out their words. After a few minutes, she heard the gate open and close. When she paused at the end of the pool and looked up, Diane was gone. Frank and Olivia had settled into lounge chairs on the opposite side of the pool, giving Elaine space while making it clear they weren't uncomfortable with her presence. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about the complexity of the community she had just joined. As she continued her swim, Elaine reflected on what had just happened. She had expected some resistance. Moving into an established, exclusive community always came with challenges, especially for someone who didn't fit the expected profile. But she hadn't anticipated having to prove her ownership quite so dramatically on her very first day. Still, there was a certain satisfaction in the way things had unfolded. Not because she enjoyed Diane's discomfort, but because standing her ground peacefully had established a precedent. She belonged here, not because anyone had granted her permission, but because she had earned her place through years of hard work and careful planning. The confrontation with Diane was likely just the beginning. There would be board meetings, negotiations about access and improvements, and probably more uncomfortable encounters. But as Elaine completed her final lap and prepared to head back to her new home, she felt ready for whatever came next. This was her community now too, and she was here to stay. By the time Elaine finished her swim, dried off, and exchanged phone numbers with Frank and Olivia, the sun was beginning to set. She waved goodbye to her new acquaintances and started the short walk back to her house, feeling considerably lighter despite the earlier confrontation. The neighborhood looked different in the golden evening light, more welcoming somehow. A few residents were out walking dogs or watering gardens, and several nodded politely as she passed. Word traveled fast in small communities, and Elaine suspected the story of what had happened at the pool was already making the rounds. As she rounded the corner onto Oak Lane, she noticed a police cruiser parked in front of her house. 2 officers stood on her porch, a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a younger woman with her hair pulled back in a neat bun. They turned at the sound of her approaching footsteps. Elaine's stomach tightened. After 15 years of practicing law, she knew better than most that encounters between police and black civilians could go sideways quickly, even for someone like her. She took a deep breath and maintained a relaxed posture as she approached. "Good evening, officers," she said pleasantly. "Can I help you with something?" The male officer stepped forward. "Are you the homeowner?" "Yes, I am. Elaine Johnson. I just moved in today." She kept her hands visible and her voice calm. "Ma'am, we received a call about a disturbance at the community pool, followed by a complaint about an unauthorized person claiming ownership of multiple properties in this neighborhood," the officer explained. His name tag read Rodriguez, Elaine sighed. "Let me guess, Diane Reynolds made that call?" The female officer raised an eyebrow. "You know the complainant? We met about an hour ago at the pool. She was unhappy to find me swimming there and called security. When they verified that I do, in fact, own not only my home but also the pool and other recreational facilities, she apparently decided to escalate to the police. Elaine kept her tone matter-of-fact, without a hint of the frustration she felt. Officer Rodriguez's expression shifted subtly. "Ma'am, do you have identification and proof of ownership? Just so we can clear this up, of course. My ID and closing documents are on my phone. Would you like to come inside while I get them? It's been a long day of moving and I could use a glass of water." The officers exchanged glances, then nodded. "That would be fine, thank you," the female officer replied. Her name tag read Chen. Elaine led them into her home, apologizing for the boxes and disarray. She gestured toward the kitchen, where she'd managed to unpack enough to make coffee that morning. "Please have a seat. Would either of you like some water?" Both declined politely. Elaine retrieved her phone and pulled up the same documents she'd shown Roy at the pool. She handed the phone to Officer Rodriguez. "As you can see, I closed on the property yesterday. The sale includes not only this house, but several adjacent lots in the community, recreational facilities that were part of the Henderson estate." Officer Rodriguez scrolled through the documents carefully while Officer Chen looked over his shoulder. After a moment, he handed the phone back with a nod. "Everything appears to be in order, Ms. Johnson. I apologize for the intrusion. We respond to all calls, but in this case it seems there was a misunderstanding. No apology necessary," Elaine assured them. "You're just doing your job. I understand that a new resident making such a significant purchase might raise questions, especially when that resident doesn't fit the expected profile of this neighborhood." Officer Chen's expression softened slightly. "Ms. Johnson, has anyone in the neighborhood made explicitly discriminatory comments to you?" Elaine considered the question carefully. While Diane's behavior had certainly been motivated by racial bias, she hadn't made any overtly racist statements that could be quoted in a police report. "Nothing explicit," Elaine replied honestly. "Just the usual assumptions and you don't belong here attitude. Nothing I haven't dealt with before." Officer Chen nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Well, you certainly do belong here. The documents confirm that. If you experience any harassment or threatening behavior, please don't hesitate to call us." "I appreciate that," Elaine said. She hesitated, then added, "May I ask what exactly Ms. Reynolds told you when she called?" Officer Rodriguez cleared his throat. "She reported a possible real estate scam, said someone was falsely claiming ownership of the Henderson properties, and that the community facilities couldn't legally be sold to an individual. She seemed quite agitated." "I see," Elaine said, suppressing a smile. "And now that you've verified my ownership, we'll inform Ms. Reynolds that there's no evidence of fraudulent activity and that her concerns have been addressed." Officer Chen replied diplomatically. "We'll also remind her about the appropriate use of emergency services." After a few more minutes of conversation, the officers prepared to leave. At the door, Officer Rodriguez paused. "Ms. Johnson, if you don't mind my asking, what are your plans for the recreational facilities? There's been a lot of speculation in the community since Mr. Henderson put everything on the market last year." "I intend to maintain community access while making some needed improvements," Elaine explained. "The facilities have been neglected for too long. I'd like to bring them up to the standard that residents deserve." Officer Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "My brother-in-law lives on Pine Street. He'll be glad to hear the pool is staying open. Their kids practically live there during the summer." As the officers walked to their cruiser, Elaine noticed several neighbors watching discreetly from their windows or front yards. She waved to the officers as they drove away, making sure everyone could see the friendly interaction. First impressions mattered in a close-knit community like this, and she wanted it clear that she had nothing to hide. Back inside, Elaine collapsed onto her couch, the events of the day finally catching up with her. She'd expected some adjustment period, but not quite this dramatic a welcome. Her phone buzzed with a text from Olivia, checking that everything was okay after seeing the police at her house. Elaine sent a quick reply assuring her new neighbor that all was well. She was about to order dinner when her phone rang. Her real estate agent, Peter. "Elaine, I just got a very angry call from someone named Diane Reynolds who claims to be the vice president of your HOA. She seems to think I sold you properties that weren't legally for sale. What's going on over there?" Elaine laughed tiredly. "It's been an interesting first day, Peter. Let's just say not everyone is thrilled about the new owner of the Henderson estate." "Ah," Peter said, understanding immediately. "That kind of interesting. I was afraid of that. Want me to send over the HOA bylaws again? Might be useful to have them handy for any Conversations that come up, that would be great, thanks. And Peter, do you know when I'm supposed to receive my resident ID and access cards? Apparently there's a whole system here with stickers and such. That should have been in the welcome packet from the management company. Let me make some calls tomorrow and sort it out. In the meantime, do you need anything else? After finishing the call with Peter, Elaine ordered takeout from a local Thai restaurant he had recommended. While waiting for the food to arrive, she decided to unpack her bedroom essentials. The physical activity helped clear her mind, and by the time the doorbell rang announcing her dinner, she had made considerable progress. She was halfway through her pad thai when another text came in. This one from Frank, sharing his contact information and offering to help if she needed anything. Neighborhood board meeting tomorrow at 7, his message concluded. Might be good for you to attend given today's events. Elaine texted back her thanks and confirmed she would be there. She had planned to spend the next day unpacking, but it seemed the community politics wouldn't wait. Better to address things head-on than allow rumors and misunderstandings to fester. After dinner, she took a glass of wine out to her back deck and sat listening to the gentle lapping of lake waves against the shore below. The property's private beach access was one of its most attractive features, and she made a mental note to explore it properly tomorrow. For now, she was content to sit and reflect on the day's events while planning her approach to the board meeting. The next morning, Elaine woke early, determined to make progress on unpacking before turning her attention to community matters. She had just finished organizing her kitchen when the doorbell rang. Opening the door, she found a middle-aged man in a suit standing on her porch, his expression serious. "Ms. Johnson, I'm Howard Wilson, president of the Lakeside Estates Homeowners Association. I apologize for dropping by unannounced, but after yesterday's incidents, I thought it might be best if we spoke directly." Elaine invited him in, offering coffee, which he accepted gratefully. As they sat at her newly organized kitchen island, Wilson got straight to the point. "I want to apologize for Diane Reynolds' behavior yesterday. It was inappropriate and doesn't reflect the values of our community leadership. I've spoken with her at length about it." "I appreciate that," Elaine replied, surprised by his directness. "It wasn't the welcome I expected, but these things happen." Wilson nodded, looking uncomfortable. "Nevertheless, it shouldn't have happened. Diane has been reminded about proper procedures and respectful communication. The call to police was completely out of line." Elaine studied him over her coffee mug. "Mr. Wilson, let me be frank. I didn't buy this property expecting everyone to welcome me with open arms. I'm a black woman moving into a community that's predominantly white and historically exclusive. Some resistance was inevitable. Perhaps, but that doesn't make it acceptable," Wilson insisted, "especially not from a board member who should know better." He hesitated, then added, "There's also the matter of your purchase of the recreational facilities. It's causing some concern among certain residents. I gathered as much from Diane's reaction. Are you here to express the board's concerns as well?" Wilson shook his head. "Not exactly. The board understood when we approved the sale that the new owner would have final authority over those facilities. Mr. Henderson was very clear about that. However, these spaces have been central to our community for decades. And naturally, people are worried about potential changes. I have no intention of restricting access or making dramatic changes without community input," Elaine assured him. "My plans involve improvements and modernization, not exclusion." Relief spread across Wilson's face. "That's exactly what I hope to hear. Would you be willing to present those plans at tonight's board meeting? It might help ease tensions if people heard directly from you." "I'd be happy to," Elaine agreed. "Though I should warn you, my plans are still in the preliminary stages. I've only owned the property for 2 days after all." Wilson smiled for the first time since arriving. "Even a general vision would be helpful, and it would give you a chance to introduce yourself properly to the community, without Diane's interference." As they continued their conversation, Elaine began to see Wilson as a potential ally, someone who understood the delicate politics of the neighborhood and seemed genuinely interested in moving past yesterday's unpleasantness. By the time he left, promising to give her a prominent spot on the evening's agenda, Elaine felt more optimistic about her place in the community. The rest of the day passed quickly as she alternated between unpacking and preparing notes for the meeting. By late afternoon, she had settled enough to take a break and finally explore the beach access that had been one of the property's main selling points. As she walked down the winding path from her backyard to the lake shore, Elaine couldn't help smiling. Despite the rough start, she was exactly where she wanted to be. Tonight's meeting would be challenging, but it was also an opportunity, a chance to reset first impressions and begin building the community relationships that would shape her experience here for years to come. The lake sparkled in the afternoon sun, waves gently lapping at the private beach that now belonged to her. Elaine took a deep breath of the fresh air and allowed herself a moment of pure satisfaction. Let Diane and anyone else who questioned her presence here think what they wanted. Elaine Johnson was home. Elaine stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the collar of her navy blazer. She had decided on a professional but approachable look for the board meeting. Dark jeans paired with a crisp white blouse and the blazer. Not too formal, but polished enough to command respect. The community center where the meeting would be held was only a 10-minute walk from her house. According to Wilson, these monthly gatherings typically drew about 20 residents, mostly the same core group of involved homeowners. Tonight, however, he expected a much larger turnout given the news that had spread through the neighborhood. As she slipped on comfortable flats and gathered her notes, Elaine's phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Heading to the meeting now. Want to walk together? Elaine smiled, grateful for the gesture of solidarity, and quickly replied with her address. A few minutes later, Olivia arrived with her husband, David, a tall man with kind eyes and a warm smile. Thought you might appreciate some friendly faces as you make your grand entrance, David said as they set off toward the community center. Word has spread about yesterday's pool incident. I suspected as much, Elaine replied. How bad is it? Olivia linked her arm with Elaine's. Let's just say Diane has been working the phones. But don't worry, not everyone shares her concerns. Many people are actually excited about your plans for the recreational areas. Plans that are still very much in development, Elaine reminded them with a laugh. Well, you might want to develop them quickly, David advised. The speculation is getting wild. Someone told me you're planning to build a water park and charge admission. Elaine nearly stopped walking. A water park? Where would I even put that? People fear change, Olivia said with a shrug. And when there's an information vacuum, they fill it with their worst anxieties. The community center came into view, a single-story building with large windows and a small parking lot that was already full. Cars lined the street on both sides and people were streaming toward the entrance. Wow, Elaine murmured. Wilson wasn't kidding about the turnout. Nothing brings out the neighbors like property values and pool access, David quipped. As they approached the entrance, Elaine took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and put on her most confident smile, the one she used before major court appearances. Inside, the main meeting room was packed. Folding chairs had been arranged in rows facing a long table at the front, where Wilson and 4 other people, presumably the rest of the board, were already seated. Elaine recognized Diane among them, sitting stiffly at one end of the table. The buzz of conversation died down as Elaine entered with Olivia and David. Every head turned, and she felt dozens of curious eyes assessing her. She nodded politely to familiar faces. Frank waved from the third row and made her way toward the front where Wilson had indicated an empty chair. Quite the turnout, she commented quietly to Wilson as she took her seat. Told you people were concerned, he replied, with a wry smile. But this is good. Better to address everything at once rather than let rumors spread. At exactly 7 o'clock, Wilson called the meeting to order. He began with standard board business, approving minutes from the previous meeting, a treasurer's report, and updates on landscaping contracts. Throughout these proceedings, Diane sat rigidly, speaking only when directly addressed. Her gaze occasionally flickered to Elaine, then quickly away. Finally, Wilson reached the agenda item everyone was waiting for. Now I'd like to welcome our newest resident, Elaine Johnson. As many of you have heard, Ms. Johnson has purchased the Henderson property, including the adjacent lots and recreational facilities. I've invited her to share her vision for these community assets and address any questions or concerns. As Elaine stood and moved to the center of the room, she felt the weight of expectation. These people weren't just curious, they were worried about how her ownership might affect their daily lives, their property values, their sense of community. She had prepared remarks, but looking at the sea of faces, she decided on a more personal approach. Thank you all for the welcome. Most of you, anyway, She began with a small smile, earning a ripple of nervous laughter. I know my arrival has caused some excitement in the neighborhood, and not all of it positive. Let me start by introducing myself properly. For the next few minutes, Elaine shared her background. Her career as a corporate attorney specializing in real estate law, her journey to financial independence, and what had attracted her to Lakeside Estates. She was candid about the neighborhood's reputation for exclusivity and her awareness that she might not fit the expected profile of a resident. But what drew me here wasn't just the beautiful property or the lake access, she continued. It was the community Mr. Henderson described to me, one that valued quality of life, natural beauty, and shared spaces where neighbors could connect. That vision resonated with me, and it's one I want to preserve and enhance. She then outlined her preliminary ideas for the recreational facilities, modernizing the pool equipment, resurfacing the tennis courts, adding a covered pavilion for community events, and creating a children's play area near the pool. She emphasized that these improvements would be funded entirely by her, with no additional HOA fees for residents. My goal is to improve, not restrict, she concluded. I want these spaces to continue bringing the community together, just with better amenities and more options for everyone to enjoy. As Elaine finished, the room remained silent for a beat before erupting in questions. Wilson moderated, calling on people one by one. Most questions were practical. Timelines for improvements, potential closures during construction, whether pool hours would change. Elaine answered each thoughtfully, emphasizing that she would communicate transparently throughout any renovation process. Then a woman in the back row stood up. What gives you the right to make these decisions unilaterally? These facilities have always been managed by the board with community input. Before Elaine could respond, Wilson intervened. Actually, Patricia, that's not entirely accurate. Mr. Henderson always maintained final authority over these properties. He consulted with the board as a courtesy, not an obligation. And I intend to do the same, Elaine added calmly. I value community input and plan to form an advisory committee to help shape these improvements. But it's important to be clear about the legal reality. These are privately owned properties that I've chosen to make available for community use, just as Mr. Henderson did. Patricia sat down, looking unsatisfied but not willing to argue further. Next, an older man near the front raised his hand. Will there be any changes to the guest policy? My grandchildren visit during the summer and they love the pool. No changes to the guest policy, Elaine assured him. Family visitors will always be welcome. The questions continued for nearly an hour. Throughout, Diane remained conspicuously silent, though Elaine could feel her watching every exchange. Finally, as the meeting began to wind down, Diane raised her hand. Wilson hesitated before acknowledging her. Ms. Johnson, Diane began, her voice tight but controlled. You've spoken about improvements and community access, which sounds lovely. But what guarantees do we have that once these renovations are complete, you won't change the rules? What's to stop you from restricting access or imposing fees later? A murmur ran through the room. It was the question many had been thinking but hadn't voiced so directly. Elaine considered her response carefully. That's a fair question, Diane. Legally speaking, nothing would prevent me from doing that, just as nothing prevented Mr. Henderson from doing so during his ownership. She paused, letting that reality sink in. But I didn't invest in this community to become its gatekeeper. I invested because I want to be part of it. These shared spaces are what make Lakeside special, and restricting them would diminish that value for everyone, myself included. She looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as possible. I understand that trust is earned, not given. My words tonight are just that, words. Over the coming months and years, my actions will show my true intentions. All I ask is that you judge me by those actions, not by assumptions or fears. The room fell silent again, but this time it felt different. Less tense, more thoughtful. Even Diane seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Wilson used the moment to adjourn the formal meeting, inviting everyone to stay for refreshments. As people rose from their seats, many approached Elaine to introduce themselves, offer welcome, or share ideas about the renovations. The atmosphere had shifted notably, still cautious but warming. About 20 minutes into the informal mingling, Elaine noticed Diane standing alone by the refreshment table. After a moment's hesitation, she made her way over. Diane, she said with a nod. I hope my answers addressed some of your concerns. Diane stirred her coffee longer than necessary before responding. You speak well. Very persuasive. It's not about persuasion. It's about clarity and transparency, Elaine replied. I meant what I said about forming an advisory committee. I'd like the board to be represented on it, including you if you're interested. Diane looked genuinely surprised. You want my input? After yesterday? Especially after yesterday, Elaine said. You clearly care deeply about this community. That passion properly channeled could be valuable. I don't need your charity position, Diane said, but the words lacked their earlier venom. It's not charity. It's practical. You know this community and its needs better than I do, and you're not afraid to speak up when you see a problem. That's useful, even when it's uncomfortable. Elaine's tone was professional, neither friendly nor confrontational. Diane studied her for a long moment. I'll think about it, she finally said before walking away. Wilson approached as Diane left. That was brave, he commented. And smart. Just practical, Elaine repeated. Better to have her critiquing my plans from the inside than rallying opposition from the outside. As the gathering began to disperse, Elaine found herself surrounded by a small group of residents eager to continue the conversation about potential improvements. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and she found herself scribbling notes about ideas she hadn't considered. A walking path connecting the pool area to the lake, better lighting for evening tennis, a small herb garden near the proposed pavilion. By the time she left the community center with Olivia and David, darkness had fallen completely. Stars were visible above the tree-lined streets and the air had cooled to a pleasant crispness. I'd call that a success, David said as they walked. You won over most of the room. Even Diane seemed less hostile by the end, Olivia added. Elaine smiled. It's a start, but the real work begins now, delivering on those promises and proving that my ownership can be good for the community. As they reached her driveway, Elaine invited them in for a nightcap, but they politely declined, citing an early morning commitment. They parted with warm handshakes and promises to catch up over the weekend. Alone in her new home, Elaine kicked off her shoes and poured herself a well-deserved glass of wine. She carried it out to her deck, where the sound of gentle waves and the distant call of a nightbird created a peaceful soundtrack. The lights of homes across the lake twinkled on the water's surface, a reminder of the community she was now part of, for better or worse. She had managed the first major hurdle, but she harbored no illusions that all resistance had melted away. Diane and others like her would be watching closely, waiting for any misstep or sign that their fears were justified. The burden of proof remained on Elaine's shoulders. Still, as she sipped her wine under the stars, Elaine felt a quiet confidence. She had faced skepticism and prejudice throughout her career, and had learned to overcome them not through confrontation, but through competence and consistency. Those same qualities would serve her here. This was just the beginning of her story at Lakeside Estates. But it was off to an interesting start. 3 months had passed since Elaine's dramatic introduction to Lakeside Estates. Summer was in full swing, bringing with it the kind of humid heat that made the community pool the most popular spot in the neighborhood, and what a transformation that pool had undergone. True to her word, Elaine had wasted no time implementing improvements. The old temperamental heater had been replaced with an energy-efficient system that maintained perfect water temperature. The cracked concrete surrounding the pool had been torn out and replaced with elegant pavers in a pattern chosen by the advisory committee she had formed. New lounge chairs, umbrellas, and landscaping had transformed the once dated facility into something that wouldn't look out of place at a luxury resort. Today marked the official, grand reopening celebration. Though the pool had never actually closed during the renovations, Elaine had carefully scheduled the work in phases to minimize disruption, winning appreciation from residents who hadn't expected such consideration. She stood near the refreshment table, watching children splash in the water while their parents chatted in small groups around the deck. The turnout was impressive. Nearly half the neighborhood had shown up for the celebration, including several families Elaine had never met before. You've pulled off a miracle, Frank said, approaching with a plate of food from the catered buffet. I never thought I'd see the day when teenagers voluntarily hung out at the old folks' pool. Elaine laughed, glancing at the group of high schoolers who had claimed the far corner of the deck. The new sound system playing music they had selected probably had something to do with their presence. The advisory committee deserves most of the credit, she replied, especially for talking me out of the hot pink lounge chairs. A wise intervention, Frank agreed with a chuckle. Though I might have enjoyed seeing Diane's face if you'd gone through with it. At the mention of Diane, both their gazes drifted to where she stood near the pool entrance, clipboard in hand, checking that everyone who entered was a resident or accompanied by one. To everyone's surprise, Diane had accepted Elaine's invitation to join the advisory committee, and even more surprisingly, had thrown herself into the role with unexpected dedication. Their relationship remained formal. There were no warm friendships blooming there, but a mutual respect had developed. Diane's attention to detail and knowledge of resident preferences had actually improved several aspects of the renovation plans. For her part, Elaine had made a point of acknowledging Diane's contributions publicly, giving credit where it was due. "She's still watching you like a hawk," Frank observed. "Good," Elaine said with a smile. "Accountability works both ways. Besides, she stopped calling the police on me, which I count as progress." As the afternoon wore on, Elaine mingled with her neighbors, accepting compliments on the renovations and fielding questions about the next phase of improvements, the tennis courts, scheduled to begin renovation the following month. Howard Wilson found her as she was refilling the ice in the drink coolers. "You know, we hired caterers so you wouldn't have to work your own party," he commented, taking the ice scoop from her hands. "Force of habit," Elaine admitted. "I like keeping busy." "Well, take a moment to enjoy what you've accomplished," Wilson advised, gesturing around them. 3 months ago, half these people were convinced you were going to destroy the neighborhood. Now look at them, acting like the pool renovation was their idea all along." Elaine laughed. "That's how community works best, isn't it? When everyone feels ownership." "Speaking of ownership," Wilson said, lowering his voice, "I've had 3 different residents ask me if you'd consider similar improvements to the lakefront access path. Apparently, word of your beach area upgrades has gotten around." After addressing the pool, Elaine had indeed turned her attention to the overgrown path leading from her property to the lake, widening it and adding subtle lighting and native plantings. She hadn't expected anyone else to notice since it was technically on her private property. "People have been peeking at my beach?" she asked, amused. "From the water," Wilson clarified. "The Andrews family took their boat out last weekend and saw the new dock and seating area. Photos may have circulated." "I see," Elaine said, making a mental note to check her property line markers. "Well, the community lakefront access could use some attention. It wasn't on my immediate list, but I can certainly look into it." Their conversation was interrupted by Olivia, who approached with an elderly couple Elaine hadn't met before. "Elaine, I'd like you to meet the Thorntons. They've owned a house on Maple Drive for over 40 years, but have been in Florida for the past few months." Elaine shook hands with both, exchanging pleasantries about the neighborhood and the pool improvements. "We've heard so much about you," Mrs. Thornton said warmly. "Everyone was talking about the new owner when we got back last week. You've made quite an impression." "For better or worse," Elaine replied with a smile. "Definitely for better," Mr. Thornton assured her. "This place hasn't had this kind of energy in years. And I don't just mean the physical improvements." He nodded toward a group of young families setting up a volleyball net in the grassy area adjacent to the pool. In addition, Elaine had included in the renovations. As the party continued, Elaine found herself drawn into conversations with more and more residents who seemed genuinely appreciative of the changes she'd implemented. Even those who had been skeptical at the board meeting now approached with compliments or suggestions for future improvements. Late in the afternoon, as the celebration was beginning to wind down, Elaine noticed Diane standing alone by the new shaded seating area, making notes on her ever-present clipboard. After a moment's consideration, Elaine walked over. "Documenting issues for the next advisory committee meeting?" she asked lightly. Diane looked up, her expression neutral. "Actually, I'm noting what's working well. The traffic flow around the refreshment area is much better with the new layout, and the separate children's section has kept the main pool much calmer." Elaine blinked in surprise. "That's good to hear." An awkward silence stretched between them before Diane spoke again. "The umbrellas need to be secured better. The wind shifted one of them earlier. No damage done, but it could be a safety issue. I'll have the maintenance team check all the anchors tomorrow." Elaine promised. Diane nodded and seemed about to walk away when she suddenly turned back. My grandson is visiting next weekend. He's 7. Will the pool toys be available every day or just for special events? It was the first personal information Diane had ever shared with Elaine. The simple question about her grandson represented a tiny crack in the wall of formality Diane had maintained. They're stored in the new pool house, Elaine replied. Any resident can use them anytime. Just sign them out on the sheet by the door. Good, he loves those floating dinosaurs, Diane said, making another note. Then, with evident effort, she added, You've done a nice job here. It's much better than I expected. Coming from Diane, this qualified as effusive praise. Elaine accepted it with a simple, thank you. As Diane walked away to continue her inspection, David appeared at Elaine's side with a cold drink. Was that Diane Reynolds actually paying you a compliment? Should we check for flying pigs? Elaine laughed. Baby steps, David. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither are relationships. Well, you've worked miracles with the pool. Maybe miracles with Diane aren't far behind, he joked. As evening approached, the celebration began to naturally disperse. Families with young children packed up to head home for dinner and bedtimes. Teenagers reluctantly gathered their things after extracting promises that the music system would remain a permanent feature. Older residents thanked Elaine warmly before departing. Elaine stayed until the end, helping the cleanup crew with final tasks despite their insistence that it wasn't necessary. By sunset, only a small group remained, Olivia and David, Frank and his wife Grace, the Wilsons, and a few other residents who had become friendly with Elaine over the past months. Someone suggested continuing the evening at Elaine's house, and she happily agreed. They walked as a group through the twilight, the conversation flowing easily as they discussed the day's success and plans for the upcoming tennis court renovations. Elaine's back deck, with its view of the lake and comfortable seating, provided the perfect setting for a relaxed gathering. As she served drinks and set out the leftover appetizers from the party, Elaine realized how much had changed in just 3 months. What had begun as a hostile welcome had gradually transformed into genuine acceptance, even friendship. A toast, Wilson proposed, raising his glass. To Elaine, who took a chance on our community and has made it better already. And to many more improvements to come, Frank added. Elaine raised her glass, touched by the sentiment. To Lakeside Estates and to neighbors who become friends. Later, after everyone had gone and Elaine was alone again, she took her customary nighttime walk down to her private beach. The path lights she'd installed glowed softly, guiding her way through the trees. At the water's edge, she sat on one of the new benches and looked out across the lake. Lights twinkled from homes on the opposite shore, and the waxing moon cast a silver path across the water. The night was peaceful, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves and distant sounds of a late evening boat returning to dock. Elaine thought about how differently things might have gone if she had responded to Diane's hostility with equal anger. If she had used her ownership of the recreational facilities as a weapon, rather than a tool for community building. It would have been satisfying in the moment, perhaps, but ultimately destructive. Not just to the neighborhood, but to her own experience living there. Her phone buzzed with a text from her best friend in the city, checking in on how the pool party had gone. Better than I could have imagined, Elaine typed back. I think I'm finally home, and she was. Despite the rocky start and the work still to be done, both on the physical facilities and in changing some deeply ingrained attitudes, Elaine had found her place at Lakeside Estates. Not as an outsider tolerated because of her purchasing power, but as a resident valued for her contributions and vision. The incident at the pool on her first day now seemed like a distant memory, though Elaine knew she would never forget it completely. It had been a harsh introduction to her new community, but also an important lesson in the power of patience, persistence, and principled response to prejudice. As she walked back up to her house, Elaine paused to look at the homes of her neighbors, people who 3 months ago had been strangers, some hostile, most simply wary. Now she could identify each house by the family who lived there, could recall conversations and connections, could see beyond the initial wariness to the community beneath. Inside, she moved through rooms that now felt truly hers, no longer filled with boxes but with furniture arranged just how she liked it, with artwork she had selected, with the accumulated small touches that transform a house into a home. The journey wasn't over, There would always be more improvements to make, both to the physical spaces and to the community bonds. Diane might never become a close friend, and some residents might always view Elaine with a hint of suspicion. But tonight, as Elaine prepared for bed in the home she had worked so hard to obtain, she felt something she had been searching for all her adult life, the sense of truly belonging somewhere, of having not just ownership but connection. It was worth every challenge she had faced along the way. As she drifted off to sleep, Elaine smiled at the thought of tomorrow's advisory committee meeting, where they would finalize plans for the tennis courts and begin discussions about the lakefront access improvements. The woman who had once called the police on her for swimming in her pool would be there, clipboard in hand, ready to offer opinions and insights. It wasn't a perfect ending. Real life rarely offered those. But it was a beginning full of promise, and that was even better.